Imagine you're walking through the dense jungles of Nepal or the forests of India in the early 1900s. The towering trees surround you. The sound of wildlife echoes through the air. And suddenly, you hear a twig snap behind you. Your heart races as you turn to see the glaring eyes of a tiger. Now, imagine that tiger has a history of killing hundreds of people. This was the reality for those who lived in the shadow of the Champawat tigress. A tiger so dangerous, she claimed more than 400 lives over the course of 8 years. But how did this happen? How did a tiger, known for avoiding human contact, become the most feared predator in the region? Let's dive into this gripping and terrifying story. Before she became infamous, the Champawat tigress was just another tiger living in the dense forests of Nepal. Tigers are typically solitary creatures, known to be cautious around humans. In fact, attacks on humans by tigers were incredibly rare. These majestic animals are built for stealth and power, hunting deer, wild boar, and other animals for food. But something was different about this tigress. She would become more than just a hunter of wildlife. She became the terror of villages, the nightmare no one could escape. Her story starts in the early 1900s. In these times, life in rural Nepal was simple yet dangerous. People lived in small villages surrounded by forests, constantly aware of the wildlife around them. Tigers, leopards, and bears roamed these areas, and while encounters with these animals were not unheard of, they were usually avoidable. Yet, for reasons unknown at first, this particular tigress crossed a line, turning from her usual prey to humans. The transformation from a typical tiger to a man-eater wasn't immediate. It began slowly. People in the area started hearing stories of a tiger attacking villagers. At first, the attacks were sporadic, occurring once every few months. But soon, the pattern became more frequent, and the stories more horrifying. The tigress wasn't just attacking people, she was actively hunting them. The locals couldn't understand it. Why would a tiger, a creature known to avoid humans, suddenly start targeting them? The truth, as later discovered, was that the tigress had a major dental issue. Her canine teeth, vital for killing her natural prey, were broken, possibly from a fight or accident. Unable to hide animals effectively, she turned to humans, who were much easier to overpower and kill. But knowing why didn't make the situation any less terrifying. Imagine living in one of these villages, knowing that every day could be your last. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown, it was the constant gnawing awareness that somewhere in those dense, dark woods, a tiger was lurking. You'd wake up each morning wondering if you or your family would be next. You'd hear the stories of your neighbors disappearing, their bodies found later, and you'd wonder if it was only a matter of time before your name was added to the list. Every creak of a branch, every rustle in the underbrush would send a chill down your spine. You couldn't let your guard down for a moment, whether you were out in the fields working or trying to sleep at night. Knowledge that a skilled, stealthy predator, one that had already killed hundreds, was out there, watching, waiting, and planning its next move, must have been suffocating. Fear didn't just follow you, it surrounded you. People stopped venturing into the forest, even for essential tasks like gathering firewood or tending to their farms. But despite the precautions, the attacks continued. She would strike at night, sneaking into villages and dragging people out of their homes. There were no warning signs, no chance to fight back. Her victims would vanish, their screams echoing in the night, leaving only fear behind. The Champawat tigress became a ghostly presence, always there, lurking in the background, but never seen until it was too late. Imagine the constant fear that gripped the villagers. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves could signal the arrival of death. The anxiety was paralyzing. The attacks left communities devastated and with no clear way to defend themselves. The tigress's reign of terror didn't just affect the lives of the villagers, it shook the entire region. With over 200 confirmed kills in Nepal alone, the local government had no choice but to take action. But despite numerous attempts to track her down, she always managed to evade capture. The situation became so dire that Nepalese officials eventually forced the villagers to leave their homes and flee to safer areas. Once they realized they couldn't stop her, they pushed her across the border into India, thinking that the problem would end there. It didn't. In the Indian district of Champawat, the tigress found new hunting grounds, and the body count began to rise once more. People were living in constant terror. By now, the tigress had become a legend. Her reputation as a man-eater had spread far and wide. Everyone knew of the Champawat tigress, but no one knew how to stop her. This continued until the day a British hunter, Jim Corbett, was called in to help. Corbett, a skilled tracker and hunter, was known for taking down dangerous animals. But even for him, this would be no easy task. The tigress was smart, elusive, and had the advantage of knowing the land. Corbett had to tread carefully, knowing that one wrong move could make him the next victim. The hunt for the Champawat tigress was intense. Corbett followed her trail, hearing stories of her attacks, finding the remains of her victims, and piecing together her movements. He soon realized that this was no ordinary tiger. She had become cunning in her ways, changing her hunting tactics to avoid detection. Corbett's experience told him that this would be a fight to the death. Either he would succeed, or the tigress would continue her killing spree. The moment of confrontation came when Corbett reached the village of Champawat, where the tigress had been seen last. After speaking with the local villagers, Corbett devised a plan to draw her out. He would use a group of villagers to create a diversion and try to lure the tigress into the open where he could take a clear shot. But even with a solid plan, there was no guarantee of success. The day of the hunt arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. The villagers, terrified yet hopeful, worked with Corbett to set up the ambush. They made noise, shouting and banging objects to drive the tigress from her hiding place. Corbett positioned himself carefully, rifle at the ready, watching and waiting. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing, just the eerie quiet of the jungle, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then, suddenly, the tigress appeared. She moved swiftly and silently, her eyes locked on her next target. The sheer size and power of the animal were enough to send chills down anyone's spine. Corbett knew this was his one shot. As the tigress charged toward him, he steadied his rifle and pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the forest, and the tigress fell to the ground, mortally wounded. The villagers erupted in cheers, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. Their nightmare was finally over. The death of the Champawat tigress marked the end of an era of terror. For the first time in years, the people of Champawat and the surrounding areas could go about their lives without the constant fear of being hunted by a tiger. The relief was immense, but so was the grief for the hundreds of lives that had been lost. The story of the Champawat tigress remains one of the most harrowing accounts of human-wildlife conflicts in history. More than just a tale of a dangerous predator, it is a story that reminds us of the fragility of life and the unpredictability of nature. Why did this happen? Some have argued that the tigress's broken teeth, which made it difficult for her to hunt her natural prey, were the driving factor behind her attacks on humans. Unable to bring down wild animals, she turned to the slower, more vulnerable humans as an easier target. But others believe that the environmental factors played a role as well. The expansion of human settlements into the forests reduced the tigress's hunting grounds, putting her into closer contact with people. Jim Corbett, the hunter who ended the tigress's reign of terror, later became an advocate for wildlife conservation. He recognized that the Champawat tigress wasn't inherently evil. She was simply an animal struggling to survive in an environment that had become increasingly hostile. Corbett's later efforts to protect India's wildlife were a testament to his belief that humans and animals could coexist, but only if we respected their needs for space and resources. What would you do if you were living in a village stalked by a man-eating tiger? Could you imagine the fear and helplessness? Share your thoughts and reactions in the comments below.